She spent her last $900 on a forgotten bunker, hoping only for silence. But on the second night, her dog began barking at a wall that should not have been hollow. What Laura found buried beneath that cold concrete would test her past, her faith, and force her to choose between escaping the world or finally staying in it. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. Snow moved slowly across the Wyoming hills, thin and quiet, settling on empty land as if the world itself were trying not to wake anyone. Laura Mitchell had been living out of her truck long enough that the silence no longer scared her. What frightened her were sounds, sharp ones, sudden ones, the kind that reminded the body before the mind had time to catch up. She was 40, lean and worn in a way that came from service rather than age. Her dark hair usually tied back, her olive field jacket faded at the seams. She worked small jobs when she could find them, unloading crates, cleaning back rooms, driving deliveries for people who did not ask questions. At night, she slept in the cab of her old pickup, one hand always resting near the door. Ranger slept beside her, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a broad chest and black and tan coat, his breathing slow and steady, his presence the only thing that kept her heart from racing. Laura had been a Marine Corps medic once. She carried that fact quietly, like a scar beneath clothing. The memory that haunted her came without warning. A metal stretcher slipping, a clang against concrete, 30 seconds of hesitation. A 19-year-old boy who never stood up again. Since then, metal sounds could stop her cold, leaving her breath trapped in her chest. Ranger was the only one who noticed. He always did. She found the listing on a cracked phone screen outside a gas station, snow piling against the tires. Cold War bunker, $900, Wyoming hills, sold as is. Laura read it twice. Thick walls, she thought. Underground. Quiet. No neighbors. No doors slamming. No stretchers falling. She counted her money in the glove compartment. $913. Everything she had left. She did not hesitate. The drive north took hours, the road narrowing into dirt and ice. Ranger grew restless as the land emptied out, his ears lifting at sounds Laura could not hear. When she finally found the place, it was nothing but a concrete slab and a rusted hatch, half buried in snow. Laura stood there a long moment, breathing fog into the cold air. She knelt and brushed frost from the iron wheel. When she turned it, the hinge screamed. Metal grinding against metal. Her hands froze. Her chest tightened. For a heartbeat, she was back on another ground, another winter, another body waiting. Then she forced herself to breathe. Ranger pressed against her leg, steady and warm. The hatch opened. Laura did not run. The bunker smelled of dust and old air. The ladder descended into darkness, 15 feet straight down. Laura moved carefully, boots finding each rung, her flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. At the bottom was a steel door, shelves lining the walls beyond it. Boxes stacked neatly, a generator resting in the corner like something asleep. It was too clean for a place abandoned since the 1960s. No nests, no webs, just silence. Ranger followed her down, his nails clicking softly, his head turning as if listening to the walls themselves. Laura sat on the cot she found in the corner, elbows on her knees, hands clasped together. The quiet pressed in, heavy and complete. For the first time in months, there were no voices from other trucks, no radios, no traffic bleeding through thin glass. Only the hum of her own breath and the dog at her feet. She reached into her pocket and touched a small piece of metal she carried everywhere, a medical tag from her unit. She closed her fingers around it until the edges dug into her skin. "I'm trying," she whispered, not sure who she was speaking to. That night, the wind rose above them, snow piling over the hatch. Laura lay wrapped in her jacket, Ranger stretched along the floor beside her. Sleep came in fragments. Somewhere after midnight, Ranger lifted his head. His body stiffened. A low sound formed in his throat. Laura opened her eyes. The flashlight trembled in her hand as she sat up. Ranger stood now, staring at the far wall near the generator. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then pawed at the concrete. Laura crossed the room slowly and tapped the wall with her knuckles. The sound came back hollow, metallic, echoing. Her breath caught. It was the same sound she had run from all these years. Only this time it was coming from the earth itself. Laura rested her palm against the wall and felt the cold seep into her skin. Whatever was hidden there had been sealed away for a long time. Ranger did not look away. Laura swallowed and nodded once, as if making a promise to herself she did not yet understand. "We'll face it," she said quietly. For the first time, the silence did not feel like something she had to escape. It felt like something she might learn to stay with. Morning came quietly to the hills, wrapped in low gray light. Frost clung to the concrete like a thin memory that refused to let go. Laura Mitchell drove into town just after sunrise, the truck coughing as it warmed. Ranger sat upright beside her, watching the empty road with calm focus. The town was small in the way many western towns were. One main street, a diner that smelled of old coffee, a courthouse with peeling paint. Inside a modest legal office, Laura met Helen Foster, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and neatly pinned hair, dressed in a plain wool coat. Helen spoke softly, her voice practiced but not unkind. She warned Laura that the bunker had been abandoned for decades, that others had tried to stay there and left quickly. "People don't last," Helen said, sliding the paperwork across the desk. "Some places remember things." Laura signed without comment. She had learned long ago that warnings often came too late to matter. Back in the hills, she descended again into the bunker. In daylight, the space felt different, still silent, but alert. The shelves were clean, the floor untouched by nests or droppings. Someone once had cared enough to keep it whole. The thought stayed with her longer than she expected. That night, the wind returned. It pushed through the ventilation pipes with a long, mournful sound, like breath moving through an old chest. Laura lay awake, staring at the low ceiling. Ranger rose suddenly, muscles tight, ears forward. His bark shattered the quiet. He rushed to the far wall near the generator, scraping at the concrete with sharp insistence. Laura crossed the room slowly. She tapped the wall with her knuckles. The sound answered back, hollow and deep. Metal carried through stone. Her throat closed. The memory came fast, a stretcher slipping, the ring of steel against concrete, the moment she had frozen when a life depended on movement. Laura pressed her palm to the wall, grounding herself in the cold. Ranger did not stop. He knew something was sealed there. When the generator light flickered, Laura saw faint seams in the concrete, almost erased by time. She backed away, breathing through the ache in her chest, and sat until the shaking passed. Silence returned, heavier now, as if waiting. The next morning, Laura searched the storage crates with careful hands. Beneath a stack of yellowed manuals, she found a leather-bound notebook and folded blueprints tied with twine. The name Walter Hayes was written inside, along with dates spanning the early 1960s. Laura read slowly. Walter had been an engineer, a caretaker, a man assigned to stay behind while others moved on. His handwriting changed as the pages turned. Early entries were neat, practical. Later ones trembled. He wrote of trucks arriving at night, of men who never gave names, of a chamber sealed beyond his authority. Again and again, one line appeared, pressed harder each time. What matters is not above the ground. Laura felt a quiet recognition. She knew that voice, the voice of someone left alone with knowledge and no one to share it with. Ranger lay beside her as she read, his body angled toward the wall, his attention never drifting. Laura closed the notebook and rested her hand on his head. Walter Hayes had stayed too long. He had listened to the walls until they answered back. Laura stood and looked at the seams once more. Whatever lay beyond that concrete had claimed one man already. She made a silent promise to herself then not to disappear the same way. If she was going to stay, she would do it awake. A low ceiling of clouds followed Laura into town, the kind that pressed close to the earth and made even familiar places feel watched. Laura parked beside the only gas station for miles. The bell over the door rang softly as she stepped inside, Ranger waiting by the truck, eyes steady. Tom Caldwell stood behind the counter, a man in his late 60s with a lined face, gray beard, and oil-stained flannel pulled tight against the cold. He spoke slowly, with the careful rhythm of someone who had learned not to waste words. Tom remembered Walter Hayes well enough. Said Walter used to smile. Said that stopped after a man in a dark suit came around asking questions no one else dared to ask. After that, Tom said, voice low, Walter started locking things twice. He looked at Laura then, really looked at her. Places like that bunker, he added. They don't just keep the cold out, they keep secrets in. Laura thanked him and drove back toward the hills, the road narrowing, the sky lowering. Ranger lifted his head as the bunker came into view, his body tense in a way that felt deliberate, not afraid. Not long after Laura returned, a pickup crunched through the snow behind her. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped out, tall and broad, his coat heavy with years of winter use, gray hair peeking from beneath his hat. He had the posture of a man who had stood in storms before, and his eyes held a tired kindness. Brooks spoke plainly, said people came to that land for the wrong reasons, said trouble didn't always knock. Laura listened, hands in her pockets, Ranger pressed against her leg. After the sheriff left, Laura returned inside. She knelt on the cold floor and lifted the loose panel she had noticed the night before. Panel 3A. Beneath it, a ladder descended into darkness. Her medic's instincts took over. No light, no rope, no plan. She covered it again. Some wounds, she knew, needed time before you touched them. The SUV arrived near dusk, black and clean against the snow. Evan Cross stepped out, early 50s, lean, wrapped in a long dark coat that didn't belong to the land. His hair was neatly combed, his hands gloved, his smile practiced. He spoke softly, too softly for the questions he asked. He said he worked for a federal inventory group, said they were cataloging old Cold War sites. His eyes moved as he spoke, measuring the bunker, the ground, the dog. He asked about sealed chambers, about materials that might still belong to the government. Ranger growled, low and steady, the sound coming from deep in his chest. Laura answered carefully, giving nothing shape. Cross nodded as if satisfied, and handed her a card. When he drove away, Laura stood alone in the quiet. Inside, she rubbed a pencil across the back of the card. Words rose from the paper like a ghost. "Don't open it?" Laura sat on the cot, Ranger at her feet, and felt the weight of understanding settle in. Someone was waiting, not to protect what was buried here, but to let someone else uncover it first. Laura looked at the covered panel and then at her dog. Whatever lay below had already claimed one man. She would not be that easy to use. Snow came down hard that night, thick as wool, smothering the hills and turning the world above the bunker into a white hush. Laura waited until the wind settled into a steady moan before she moved the toolbox aside and lifted the floor panel again. Ranger stood close, black and tan shoulders tense, ears high, his eyes fixed on the opening as if he could already hear what lived below. Laura tied a rope around a support pipe, checked her flashlight twice, and eased herself down the ladder. The air changed with each rung. Colder, older. It smelled of damp stone and iron. At the bottom, her boots touched concrete, and her light found a round steel door set into the wall like the face of a buried clock. Numbers were etched beside the wheel, numbers that matched Walter Hayes's trembling journal entries. Laura's fingers hesitated on the metal. She could feel the old fear trying to rise, the one that had kept her awake for years. But she turned the wheel anyway, slow and deliberate, like opening a wound that had never been cleaned. The door sighed open with a tired groan. Inside, the room was clean in a way that did not belong to the earth. Wooden crates were stacked in neat rows. Stamped letters faded but clear. U.S. Treasury. Federal property. Do not open. Laura pried one lid loose. Gold bars lay inside, dull in the beam, heavy with a kind of silence that felt wrong. She did not feel joy, not the way people imagine. The sight of it tightened something in her chest, not with greed, but with grief. For all the nights she and Ranger had slept hungry in the truck, for the men and women she had patched up in dust and blood, while fortunes sat hidden beneath safe concrete. Laura set the lid back down, as if closing a casket. On a small metal table, she found an envelope sealed with wax, the paper yellowed, but intact. Walter Hayes's name was written in careful strokes. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. The letter was short, plain, and heavy. It warned her not to trust men who arrived with official words in polished shoes. It said the bunker was never about protecting the country. It was about burying something until everyone forgot it existed. Laura read the lines twice, then folded the paper and pressed it against her palm. She understood Walter's handwriting now, not as history, but as loneliness, as a man trying to leave behind one clean truth in a world that kept asking him to lie. Ranger's nails clicked above her on the ladder, restless. Laura looked back at the crates and felt something colder than fear settle in. The secret was awake. The storm hit after dark. The bunker trembled under the wind's weight, the vent pipes rattling like bones. Laura sat on the cot with Ranger at her feet, the letter beside her, the journal open to the last page. Outside, the world disappeared under snow. Then came the sound, metal against metal. A careful tap at first, then a harder strike. Laura's body reacted before her mind could name it. Her chest tightened. Her hands went numb. The sound was too close to the memory. A stretcher slipping, the sharp clang that had stolen 30 seconds from her and a boy's whole life. For a moment, she froze in the same place she had frozen years ago, breath locked behind her teeth. Ranger rose, hackles lifting, a low growl vibrating through the floor. The second strike came, louder. Laura forced air into her lungs, one slow breath, then another. She pressed her feet to the ground. "Not again," she whispered, not to the men above, but to the part of herself that wanted to vanish. She killed the lantern and moved into the dark with the calm hands of a medic returning to an old duty. She pulled the smoke canister from her bag, the kind she once used to signal in storms, and waited by the ladder. When the hatch screeched, cold air poured down. A beam of light cut through the smoke as she popped the canister, and Ranger surged forward with a speed that was pure instinct. A man's shout echoed, sharp and startled. Laura fired one warning shot into the ground above the opening, not to harm, but to draw a line. The men cursed and scrambled back into the storm. Seconds later, sirens rose in the distance, muffled by snow, but unmistakable. Sheriff Brooks had come, headlights sweeping the trees, red and blue lights painting the white world in restless color. The intruders fled into the night, leaving only footprints and the bitter smell of exhaust. When the bunker quieted again, Laura sat with Ranger pressed against her leg, his breath warm through her jacket. After the storm eased, she went back down to the vault room alone. The gold waited in perfect rows, patient as stone. She could have taken it. She could have loaded her truck and driven until the roads turned to dust and no one knew her name. For a long time, Laura stood there, listening to the drip of water somewhere in the dark and to her own heartbeat. She thought of Walter Hayes sealing himself into silence until it swallowed him. She thought of that 19-year-old boy and the 30 seconds she would never get back. Running would be easy. It would feel familiar. But it would turn her into another ghost inside another bunker. Laura closed the crate, latched the lid, and turned the wheel on the vault door until it locked with a solid final click. She rested her forehead against the cold steel and let the tears come quietly, not as surrender, but as release. Above her, Ranger waited. And for the first time, Laura felt the beginning of a different kind of strength, one that stayed. Spring arrived late in the hills, slow and cautious, as if the land itself needed time to trust the light again. The rumors came before the thaw. Sheriff Daniel Brooks told Laura plainly, standing by the truck with his hat in his hands, breath fogging the air. If the higher offices decided to look closer, the bunker would lose its quiet forever. Brooks looked older than before, the lines around his eyes deeper, his voice steady, but waited. He was a man who had learned where law ended and conscience began. Laura listened without interrupting, Ranger sitting at her side, alert but calm. She understood what Brooks was offering her without saying it outright. Time. A narrow window to choose what kind of place this land would become. Laura spent that night alone in the bunker, the vault sealed beneath layers of concrete and steel, the gold untouched. She sat at the small table, the generator humming softly, Walter Hayes's journal open beside her. She did not read it again. She didn't need to. Some truths, once understood, did not ask to be repeated. In the morning, she made her decision. Laura contacted the right offices. Not loudly, not greedily. She cooperated where she had to and refused what felt wrong. What came back to her was modest, legal, enough to repair walls, replace wiring, and buy supplies. Enough to turn a place meant for hiding into one meant for staying. By summer, the bunker no longer felt like a wound in the earth. Wood panels softened the concrete. Light filtered down through widened vents. Blankets were folded on shelves where crates once stood. A hand-painted sign near the entrance read, "Hope Haven, a shelter for veterans and German shepherds." The first man to arrive was Michael Turner, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, his beard flecked with gray, his flannel jacket worn thin at the elbows. He spoke little. He carried everything he owned in a single duffel bag. For 3 days, Michael did not tell his story. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall, hands resting on his knees, breathing slow. Ranger lay beside him, close enough to touch. No questions. No expectations. On the 4th morning, Michael looked up at Laura and said quietly that it had been a long time since a place did not ask him to explain himself. Laura nodded. That was the point. Not long after, Anna Hayes arrived, Walter's niece, early 40s, her hair braided neatly, her coat still carrying the smell of the road. She asked for the journal. Her hands trembled as she held it. "My uncle wasn't broken," she whispered, tears catching in her voice. "He was just alone." Laura did not correct her. Some words were better left to settle on their own. As the seasons turned, the bunker filled with small human sounds. Coffee boiling, boots drying by the vent, quiet laughter that came and went without ceremony. Laura worked with her hands now. She fixed shelves. She listened more than she spoke. At night, when the generator hummed and the wind moved gently through the pines above, she would sit on the cot with Ranger's head resting against her leg. She thought sometimes of the girl she had been in uniform, of the medic who froze for 30 seconds and carried that weight for decades. She did not try to erase that memory anymore. She let it sit beside the others, part of the same long story. One evening, Sheriff Brooks stopped by with a box of donated blankets and a tired smile. He told Laura the paperwork was finished. Hope Haven was recognized now. Official. real. After he left, Laura turned off the generator and let the bunker fall into natural silence. No hollow echoes, no waiting walls, just breath and warmth and the soft presence of lives learning how to remain. Laura rested her hand on Ranger's neck and felt the steady pulse there. For the first time, the quiet did not feel empty. It felt earned. And Laura understood at last that staying was not the opposite of running. It was the answer she had been walking toward all along. As this story ends, remember that many quiet battles are still being fought every day. Loneliness, illness, aching bodies, and long nights can make the world feel very small. If you are watching this and feeling unseen, you are not forgotten. Your life still matters. Your memories still carry value. Like Laura, peace can come even after long years of pain. Sometimes healing begins simply by staying, breathing, and allowing kindness in. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need comfort, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel.